Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. This is my top 10 books, there's a little cheat in there, of 2019. These are really in no particular order, it's just kind of how I pulled them off my shelf. I think I know what my favorite of the year is, because I think it's going to be a favorite book of all time, but I think time will have to have elapsed before I can really make that declaration. But I had a really great reading year. I think I read around 130 books last year, which is a lot of books. There were a lot of times where I basically chose reading over adulting. Unlike many people, my goal for this year is actually going to be to read less, and I will get into that in another video. Today we're here to talk about my favorite books of 2019. I'm going to start with Becky Chambers' The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. This is a very well-known, well-loved book. I also read the second book in this series, which honestly did not stick with me. The whole time I was reading the second book in this series, I was thinking about this book and the characters in this book, and I think I need to reread the second book before I go on to the third, although I don't think that they're really linked character-wise, but these characters really stuck with me. We have this kind of misfit group of people on a wormhole punching ship, and they're all thrown together, multiple species of humanoid creatures, or not even, some of them aren't humanoid, but we follow the main character who is a human, and she has a bit of a past, and so going on board this ship, she's literally like flying away from all of her troubles in her past, and she just becomes entwined in the culture of the ship that she's on, the Wayfarer, and I just absolutely loved the way that the relationships were built, and especially the way that Becky Chambers uses the species diversity to represent diversity in our world. And I think it's subtle enough that she's not bashing you over the head with it, but it is clearly there. Okay, the next is kind of my cheat. So I'm going to say the Red Rising trilogy, because my husband and I read these 3 this year. I think we started Red Rising like the last week of 2018. And then we continued on with the rest of the series. First book is Red Rising, the second Golden Sun, and the third Morning Star. And these 3 collectively are the Red Rising trilogy, although now there are 2 more books in like a future series featuring many of the same characters. This is a future-based dystopian where people are living on Earth, they're living in space, they're living on moons, they're living on Mars. And the people have been categorized and grouped into basically a caste system based on colors. And reds are one of the low colors. I believe they are the lowest color. Our main character, Darrow, is a low red, and he has lived all his life in the mines of Mars, terraforming Mars for human habitation. The first 50 maybe pages of this book were kind of just getting to know the atmosphere of where he's from in these mines on Mars, the relationships, the way the structure. You get an idea of this color-based caste system based on who the workers are and who the overseers are and who the security type people are. And then there's an event happens, and he loses someone very close to him, and it changes his perspective on the way the system is and on what can be done about it. And so as the title suggests, there is a rising. Darrow basically has to infiltrate the system in order to change it from the inside, and that's kind of where we start with book 1, and then books 2 and 3 continue on in that story of him trying to change the, as they say, break the chains in the book, change the system so that the reds can never be more than anything than a red, and essentially all of the society is working to benefit the golds, who are the high ups. This is science fiction, it's dystopian science fiction, and the beauty of the language would often strike me because it's not necessarily something that I'm expecting from that genre. So I think if you like more literary books, you will absolutely love this. If you like science fiction, I think there's tons for you to love in this as well. I highly recommend Pierce Brown's Red Rising series. So that was some sci-fi fantasy. We're going to move on to a few nonfiction choices next. We have Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. This is Trevor Noah of The Daily Show. He was born in South Africa during apartheid. His mother was black, his father was white, and his existence as a half black, half white person was literally illegal. And so it's kind of a memoir about that. Trevor goes about explaining multiple aspects of his childhood through different phases, but with his great humor and wit. There was one point I was literally crying trying to read a particular scene out to my mom in a waiting room of a hospital. You know, when you're not supposed to laugh, it makes things even funnier. So I absolutely love Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. And speaking of crimes, we have Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is a memoir written by Bryan Stevenson about his time as a civil rights lawyer in the Deep South. I think it's Mississippi, right? It's Mississippi or Alabama. I think it's Alabama. Anyhow, so the chapters alternate between the general trajectory of his career, and in that we have multiple cases. We have many different cases that are told that are part of telling that story. And then the alternating chapters are about Walter McMillan, who was a man who was wrongly convicted of murder. So then we see his story, his time on death row, and Bryan Stevenson and his team trying to get Bryan Stevenson off death row and ultimately out of prison. Extremely powerful, super hard to read in times. It just, how hopeless these people must feel, where at every turn the system is built in a way that they cannot succeed, and they hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And this is or will very soon be a movie. And then lastly, in nonfiction, we have The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Weijung. This is a collection of essays about Esme's own experiences, what it is to have schizoaffective disorder, what it was like before she had the diagnosis, getting the diagnosis, and then multiple facets of her life that are affected by it. My own kind of ignorance and bias was really shattered in this. I have a personal family history with schizophrenia. My maternal grandmother had it, and it's always a very scary thing. She died just before I was 4 years old, so I have very limited memory of it, but I do remember her. And then, of course, I have the stories from my mom and from her sister. And so it was a very personal thing. It's a very scary thing for me. And so what was really, I think, the most enlightening for me was just seeing how competent Esme Weijung is, and seeing how she has been able to succeed in life, not glossing over the hard times as she really goes into those, but in showing me, despite her diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, and despite these bad times that she will go into, she's still a brilliant, very competent woman who is worthy and is an important member of society and a wife. And I just really highly recommend, especially if you have anyone in your life who has mental illness of any kind, I really highly recommend The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Weijung. Wanna play fetch? Then we have one of the only YA books I read this year, and the only one on this list, that is Deb Colletti's A Heart in the Body in the World. What's the girl's name? Annabelle is a 17-year-old girl. She's on the cross-country team, and something happened in her previous school year that is haunting her. She's traumatized by it. It's something that everybody knows about, and she can't deal. And one day she just takes off running. She just literally has to run away from her problems, run away from her current situation and all the eyes on her. So she decides she's going to run, I believe it's to Washington, D.C. Is that right? Yeah, from Seattle to Washington, D.C. And her grandfather isn't going to let her do this completely alone. He ends up following behind in the motorhome and acts as like her aid station and her personal kind of safety and pit crew, really. And then her other people in her life kind of rally around her and help her to accomplish this goal. And as she's doing this running, we are finding more and more about what had happened, and she is processing this kind of at the same time as we're learning about it. And it was really, really powerful. Annabelle felt like a real person who was struggling with a real issue, and my heart was certainly like bound by this book. And then we have a bit of a dark magical twist here. We have The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell of BookTube. This is her short story collection, and this is the UK cover. You can order it directly from her website or on Book Depository. And the UK cover doesn't have a dust jacket, so this is just a naked hardback. And it's absolutely beautiful. I ordered it directly from her, so it is signed to me. This is a collection of fascinating short stories. And as I was reading this, I just kept thinking, like, how does your brain even come up with that? And then she takes these really fantastical, wonderful ideas and then writes them so beautifully into really great stories. And then the only classic on this list, we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I read this in high school, remember basically nothing about it other than there were Moors, and I didn't really know what Moors were. This was a fabulous reread. Now, Katie from Books and Things suggests looking at this book as a revenge story and not a love story. And I think that that really is the way to look at it, because I didn't have an expectation of like warm, fuzzy feelings. There's really nothing warm and fuzzy about this story at all. So the story is told kind of by two different narrators. We have a man who's coming to, I think he's coming to like pay his rent or something like that. We start off with him and we end with him, and he's basically having a conversation with the housekeeper, and then the housekeeper tells the bulk of the story. And what's great about that is as we shift perspectives, you can see the different points of view from the housekeeper and from the tenant about certain people in the story, and it gives us an idea as to the credibility, the reliability of our main narrator, as we follow basically two different households of people and how they their lives are intermingled and entangled and just caught in each other's snares, and it's fabulous and dark and twisty, and I absolutely loved it. Number 9 is The Starless Seat by Erin Morgestern. Again, this is a UK cover. I just loved the blue with the bee there. This was one of the last books I read in 2019, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it far more than The Night Circus. I felt completely like sucked in to this book. So we follow, this is a book within a book. So we have Zachary Ezra Rollins as our main character. He's a college student, and in the school library, he finds a book that curiously does not have a title or an author. He starts thumbing through it, and he finds a story about something that happened to him as a kid, where he was in like an alley and he found a door that was painted onto a wall. He could tell that it was painted on, but he felt like if he tried to turn that doorknob, that it would open, but he chose not to. He never told this to anyone, but he reads about this in this book. And then that kind of starts off the mystery and the adventure of this book. There's basically kind of like a secret society, the collectors, and we start getting all these different information. And in certain chapters are different pieces. So we have chapters that are the Zachary chapters, and this is kind of like what is happening right now as we follow Zachary into this underground library. Then we get stories from the Book of Sweet Sorrows, which is the book that Zachary had found his own story in, and we hear other stories within that book. We also get fables. So you have a lot of times when I'm reading a book that's kind of a mystery, I picture it as a puzzle where the puzzle pieces start laying in and we start seeing different parts of the puzzle before it all comes together. In my mind, I don't know if this helps anybody, I was picturing like a trembling Jenga tower, and there are all these missing pieces, and things aren't quite aligned. It's like we're reverse engineering this Jenga tower and putting the pieces where they belong as different pieces of the story come together. I loved being in this world, and I'm so glad that she wrote this. I think I would probably like to reread this as an audiobook at some point in the future. Highly recommend The Starless Seat. And finally, I think my favorite book of 2019, because I believe this is now one of my favorite books of all times, that is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is about Stevens, a butler in post-war England. He had worked at Darlington Hall, this great manor house, for decades, and we follow him on a road trip to the English countryside as he is just kind of reminiscing about what it was to work at this great manor house, what it was to be a butler. He takes great pride in being a butler, and can you really be a great butler if you didn't serve at a great house? And Darlington Hall was a great house. He kind of reminisces about this, and in this reminiscing, he ponders some not great so things about Lord Darlington, and despite him being a great gentleman, can he be a great gentleman if some of the things he did were maybe morally questionable? And this causes him doubts about basically the faith he had in the man that he served all those time, and he is kind of mourning a little bit the passing of this time, of this now in this post-war England. And it makes me think of Downton Abbey, in the time where the middle class is rising and there really is no more need for these great manor houses. The house is now owned by an American, and what is really his relationship with him supposed to be like? And it's kind of indicative of the changing times. So these were my favorite books of 2019. I'm looking forward to looking back on this video in the future and see what I still think and remember about these books. Looking forward to a great 2020. Happy New Year. Thank you for watching. See you around the tubes.